My name's Olivia Carter, and today, I'm the woman they call when their company is sinking and their pride is too big to admit it. I'm standing by the floor-to-ceiling window of my office, 28 floors above Manhattan. The late morning sunlight pours in, catching the soft sheen of my silk ivory blouse. I can smell my jasmine perfume lingering in the air, a small reminder that I don't just work, I arrive. The coffee on my desk has gone cold, but I'm not reaching for it. My eyes are fixed on the email glowing on my laptop screen. Subject: Urgent. Consulting proposal. From Richard Hale, CEO, Hale and Company. Richard Hale. My old boss. The man who once waved me off mid-sentence during a presentation I had spent weeks perfecting. The man who didn't even glance at my slides before handing the meeting over to someone else. Now, 5 years later, his company is practically begging for my help. I press my fingers lightly against the edge of my desk, the cool glass surface grounding me. My reflection in the window looks calm, composed, but inside, there's a small, sharp ache. Not from anger anymore, but from remembering how much it hurt back then. My phone buzzes. A calendar reminder pops up. Meeting with Hale and Company, 2 p.m. I take a deep breath, smooth my blouse, and smile to myself. The irony tastes sweet. 5 years ago, I wasn't Olivia Carter, sought-after consultant. I was just Olivia, junior marketing associate at Hale and Company, fresh out of grad school, running on caffeine, ambition, and the naive belief that hard work always speaks for itself. That day, I'd worn my lucky navy blazer, the one my grandmother, Evelyn, had given me. She'd slipped her old silver pen into the pocket that morning. "Write your own story, sweetheart," she'd said, pressing my hand around it. I thought it was just a sweet gesture. I didn't know I'd be clinging to those words by the end of the day. I had spent weeks preparing my first major presentation, a bold new campaign strategy for a struggling client. I'd stayed up past midnight fine-tuning the visuals, rehearsing until my throat ached. My hands trembled slightly as I set up in the boardroom, but it was the good kind of nerves. The kind you get when you're about to do something that matters. Richard walked in 10 minutes late, talking to someone on his phone. He didn't even look at me when he said, "Let's make this quick." I started speaking, voice steady, slide sharp. But just 3 minutes in, he held up a hand, cutting me off mid-sentence. "We don't have time for this," he said, glancing at the creative director. "Let's stick with the plan from last quarter." The air seemed to vanish from the room. My throat tightened, heat pricked at my cheeks. Around the table, a few people shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. I forced a polite smile, though I could feel my hands shaking as I gathered my notes. The silver pen's weight in my blazer pocket was suddenly heavy, like it was reminding me that I didn't have to sit there and be invisible. The rest of the meeting blurred. By the time it ended, I already knew. I wasn't going to wait around for permission to be heard. That evening, I walked into Richard's office. My resignation letter was in one hand, my grandmother's pen in the other. "I hope your plan from last quarter works out," I said, keeping my tone even. "I'm going to try something different." He barely looked up from his screen. "Good luck." I left without another word, stepping into the cool Manhattan night, the city lights reflecting in the glass doors as they closed behind me. I didn't have a grand plan when I walked out of Hale and Company that night. Just a beat-up laptop, a couple of credit cards, and the stubborn conviction that my ideas deserved to be heard, somewhere, somehow. For the first few months, my office was the corner of my tiny studio apartment in Queens. The desk was wedged between the bed and the window, and the view was mostly brick wall. I lived on instant noodles, grocery store coffee, and the occasional splurge on a croissant when I landed a new client. My first break came from Marian Blake, a veteran marketing executive I'd met at a networking event. She was one of those women who looked like she could run both a boardroom and a marathon before breakfast, and probably had. She listened to me pitch my services in a noisy cafe, sipped her espresso, and said, "You're good, Olivia. You just need someone to say yes before the rest of them will." She gave me my first contract, a small project, but it was mine. I worked through the nights, eyes burning, perfecting every detail. The campaign performed better than anyone expected, and Marianne told her colleagues. Suddenly, I had referrals. Still, it wasn't glamorous. I took meetings in borrowed conference rooms, dressed in my best thrift store blazers, and pretended not to notice when clients looked surprised at how young I was. There were setbacks: the proposal that got ghosted after 3 promising calls, the check that bounced when I was already behind on rent. There were moments when self-doubt pressed so hard on my chest I thought I might crack. But there were wins, too. The first time a client sent me flowers to say thank you. The first time I saw my work featured in a national campaign. The first time I transferred money into my savings account and didn't have to take it back out a week later. I learned to move quietly. I didn't post much on social media beyond the occasional coffee photo or skyline shot. When people from my old life asked what I was up to, I said, "Oh, just consulting a bit." I never mentioned the fact that my client list now included names they'd read about in Forbes. 3 years in, my company, Carter Strategies, had grown beyond what I'd ever imagined. I hired a small team, all women, all brilliant. We worked out of a sleek downtown office with exposed brick and plants in every corner. Clients trusted us. Competitors respected us. And still, I stayed under the radar. I wasn't hiding out of fear. I just didn't see the point in announcing my success to people who had once looked right through me. Until now. Now, the man who had once told me, "We don't have time for this," was paying for my time at a rate that would make him choke on his coffee. The lobby of Hale and Company looked almost exactly the same as the day I left: gleaming marble floors, chrome accents, and that faint citrus cleaner smell. But walking through it now, my heels clicking in slow, even rhythm, I didn't feel like the same woman. The receptionist glanced up, offered a polite smile, then froze when she recognized my name on the visitor list. I could almost see the curiosity flicker in her eyes. "Conference room A," she said, voice a little higher than before. When I stepped inside, the room was full, a dozen people around the long table. My eyes swept the space, catching on Richard Hale at the far end. His hair was grayer now, his suit just as expensive. For a moment, he didn't place me. "Olivia Carter," I said, offering my hand. His eyes narrowed slightly, then widened. "Olivia from—" "Yes," I said smoothly. "From here. Once upon a time." He shook my hand, but his grip was hesitant. "It's been a while." 5 years, I said, sliding into my seat. We went through the formalities: small talk, introductions to the team. I let them talk first, listened to their challenges, nodded thoughtfully. I wanted them to relax before I started peeling back the layers of the problem they'd brought me in to solve. Half an hour in, I laid out my preliminary strategy, a bold, multi-channel approach that would reposition their brand within 6 months. I spoke clearly, confidently, watching the faces around the table. Most were engaged. A few took notes. Richard just stared, a faint crease between his brows. When I finished, there was a pause. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Impressive," he said, almost reluctantly. "What's the fee structure?" I slid a printed proposal across the table. He scanned it, and I saw it the exact moment his eyes landed on the number. "This is for 6 months?" he asked. "Yes," I said evenly. "My firm requires a 50% deposit up front." A flicker of disbelief crossed his face. "You're charging us 2.4 million. I finish for him." "Yes." The silence in the room was delicious. I kept my gaze steady. "You're not just paying for the hours, Richard. You're paying for expertise, for proven results, and for the kind of insight that could have saved you millions 5 years ago." The words hung there. No anger in my tone, just fact. Around the table, a few people shifted, glancing at each other. Finally, Richard gave a short, dry laugh. "I suppose that's fair. We've lost some ground." "Which is exactly why you called me," I said, leaning forward slightly. "You need a win. I deliver wins." For the first time in years, I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before. Not arrogance, not dismissal, respect, and maybe, just maybe, regret. He signed the agreement before the meeting ended. As I stood to leave, he hesitated, then said quietly, "Olivia, I underestimated you." I smiled, slipping my grandmother's silver pen back into my bag. Yes, you did. 2 days later, I was back in their boardroom. This time, not to convince them of my worth, but to lay down the rules of engagement. I placed a slim folder in front of Richard and his executive team. Before we begin, I want to be clear, I said, my voice calm but firm. My strategies don't just change numbers. They change cultures. And that's part of the deal. Richard exchanged a look with his COO, but nodded for me to continue. First, I began. Every voice in this company gets a seat at the table literally. Weekly team meetings with open floor discussions. No interruptions, no dismissals, no waving someone off because you've already decided they're not worth listening to. I let that one hang in the air for a beat. Second, you implement a mentorship program for women and minority employees with real, measurable goals. Not a PR stunt. Real support, real growth opportunities. Richard's brow furrowed, but he stayed silent. Third, I said, credit is given where it's earned. If someone creates an idea, their name goes on it. Period. I saw a few heads nod, quietly, almost cautiously. These conditions aren't negotiable, I added. Because without them, you're just painting over cracks in the foundation. And I don't build on bad foundations. Richard cleared his throat. And if, hypothetically, we don't agree? I smiled, slow and deliberate. Then I walk. And you lose the person who can actually turn this around for you. Silence. Then the COO spoke up. She's right. This isn't just about revenue. It's about survival. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me for a long moment. Finally, he exhaled. Fine. We'll do it. I tapped the folder lightly. One more thing. I'll personally review the mentorship program for the first year. And I want quarterly reports on promotion rates and pay equity. If I see backsliding, my contract ends immediately, and I take my strategies elsewhere. His jaw tightened. You drive a hard bargain, Olivia. I learned from the best, I said, letting just enough irony into my voice to make him remember that boardroom 5 years ago. We shook on it. But this time, his grip wasn't hesitant. It was steady. As I left, I caught sight of a young woman at a desk near the door. She glanced up, offered a shy smile. Her eyes had that spark I used to see in my own reflection, before it was dimmed by someone else's doubt. Now I was making sure that spark never went out again. 6 months later, I walked back into Hale and Company, not for a board meeting, but for something better, their first mentorship graduation ceremony. The energy in the room was different now. The junior staff didn't cling to the edges anymore. They owned their space. Conversations overlapped in easy, confident bursts. On the wall, a photo collage showed smiling faces from the new mentorship program. Women, men, people of every background. Richard approached me, a glass of sparkling water in hand. His hair was a little Messier, his suit a little less intimidating. We've seen a 15% revenue increase, he said, almost sheepishly. And the staff engagement scores are up. I didn't think culture could change this much. I nodded. It can, when people feel seen. One of the new associates, a young woman named Emily, stepped forward. I just wanted to say thank you for all of this. She gestured at the room, her voice catching slightly. I smiled, reaching into my bag. The silver pen gleamed in my hand. My grandmother gave me this before my first big presentation, I told her. She said, write your own story. I didn't realize at the time that sometimes that means starting from a blank page, even if it scares you. Emily's fingers curled gently around the pen when I offered it to her. Someday, I said, pass it to someone who needs it more than you. Her eyes widened, then softened with understanding. As the evening wound down, I stood near the doorway, watching the ripple I had set in motion. This was bigger than revenue, bigger than reputation. This was legacy. When I finally stepped out into the Manhattan night, the air was crisp, the city lights glittering like they were in on The Secret. I thought about that young woman 5 years ago, the one standing in a boardroom with her voice cut short and her worth dismissed. She hadn't vanished. She'd just been waiting for the right stage. And now, That stage was mine. I took one last look at the building behind me, a small smile curving my lips. My boss once ignored my presentation. Now, his company pays me millions to speak. Fade to black.